In the Know, a radio program talking to the newsmakers in Ogle, Lee, DeKalb counties and beyond, keeping you in the know. Here's your host, Charles Van Horn.
Good morning and happy Sunday. Joining me in studio, Illinois State Senator Li Arellano. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Glad to have you on board. Talking about lots of things. Springfield, the hubbub, the spring legislative session is in full swing, pounding a lot of pavement back and forth. What's your best, by the way, from your home in Dixon to Springfield? What's your best stopwatch to stopwatch, door handle to door handle?
Oh man, I can neither confirm nor deny.
If you're an Illinois state trooper, turn your radio off now.
Yeah. We're just gonna say 3 hours and stick to that story.
3 hours.
Yeah.
Boy, it does. Sometimes you get a little cross-eyed there, don't you? You get south of Bloomington normal. You're like, I got to get to Lincoln.
You do. I have learned to listen to podcasts for my news. Because it's such a long drive. I have to work during the drive. So I listen to news podcasts and I listen at like 1.3 speed. So everybody's voices I hear at a much faster rate.
Let's talk about some of the things you've been working on. One is the electronic notary, Senate Bill 1573. You got it out of the committee, out of the Senate, so good for you there. What exactly does that bill do, and how is that going to help, especially those of us in rural areas?
So that's a great question. This is one of those niche things I found talking to business community, where Illinois doesn't have enough electronic notaries. And as the world goes more and more online and people are trying to cut deals across long distances, electronic notaries are a very useful and sometimes critical way of doing it. There are some companies that will not do business any other way. And in Illinois, we double tax it, just like we do with gases and a lot of other things. So you go through the training and the certification and pay the fee to become a notary. And there's no extra training to become an electronic notary, but we just have an extra fee for whatever reason.
It makes sense.
Right. And so because of that, we have a big shortage of electronic notaries in Illinois, and that is a business problem. That makes it harder to do business across distances. As you mentioned, in rural areas, they're always cutting deals across distances and online and over the telephone or whatever the case may be. So this bill is very simple. For 2 years, it completely waives the second fee, the double taxation part of getting your electronic notary. And the Secretary of State office in that time is hoping to streamline the process.
Yeah.
So that way it goes away forever and then we make it easier to become an electronic notary. Because if you've already done the classes and the testing and all that stuff, you've got the bond for it, then we should be encouraging people to be e-notaries. That's the direction the world's moving in. The state of Illinois has fallen behind way too often from the speed of business. And this is just one area of keeping us up with the speed of business. And it's one of the few bills in Springfield that is actually lowering a tax and fee. So even if it's a very small one, I'm proud to have my name attached to something that's actually making Illinois more affordable, however slightly.
One less piece of red tape.
Right.
You recently criticized the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services about Medicaid reimbursement issues and the struggles that pharmacies have. And even in large cities, you have pharmacies that are creating, they talk about food deserts. There's also pharmacy deserts now in places where people may not have access to transportation. Well, you certainly have difficulty getting around maybe, and you have needs, and then they close the pharmacy on the corner. It makes it that much worse.
Right. And this is an issue I really came to know because of in that group of pharmacists that were talking to me. One of Rochelle's local pharmacists was one of them, one of Amboy's as well. So this is an issue that directly affects Ogle County and the Rochelle region. And the problem is very simple. These mega pharma is cutting deals that helps the big boys and hurts the reimbursement rates for our independent pharmacists, right? Trying to kind of shove them and corner them out of the market. So because of that, to make a very complicated thing simple, local pharmacists, independent pharmacists are sometimes having to sell their drug deals at a loss, like literally not even making money on some of them and getting pressured into that in order to keep contracts for other disbursement. And that is forcing them out of business. And some are closing. As you mentioned, we're starting to develop these pharmacy deserts. The other problem we have with this is there's not supposed to be spread pricing. That is when the middlemen take all of the money, some of which is supposed to be going to the local pharmacists for these drug prices, and they just keep it for themselves. And it is the state of Illinois that's supposed to be enforcing that and making sure that doesn't happen. And we have found about $100 million in audits that disappeared, never made it to independent pharmacists like here in Rochelle, and we can't account for it. And so I've tried to work together with the statewide pharmacist organization for those independent small business pharmacists, saying you have to make sure the middlemen aren't taking their money.
Is this something that the Illinois Attorney General's office should be a part of as well?
I would think so. It's the regulation really comes at the agency level, but the enforcement certainly could be triggered by a lawsuit from the AG if we cannot do it. The problem is we're so bad at tracking things in Illinois that the evidence you would need to file a lawsuit, I'm not sure it completely exists. We don't know where the money is or what happened to it. So did it end up somewhere it was supposed to? Probably not, but we can't guarantee that. Did it end up with the local pharmacist? That seems almost certain that it did not. Did it ever get charged to the patient? Presumably. And you would think we would know all these things, and we just don't.
You know, they have on our license plates, Land of Lincoln, which is a great phrase. Where'd the money go? Also would be a good thing to put right at the bottom of the license plate.
Where is all our money?
Where'd the money go? This is Illinois. Li Arellano, you were the mayor of Dixon.
Yeah.
Roots ingrained in the area. How long have you now been representing the area in Springfield?
A little over a year. I started in January of last year, of course, spent 8 years as a local mayor. Grew up in Grandy Tour here in Ogle County, so know the area very well. And that's part of why I do these battles. You know, we were talking earlier about the veto session where we got road and bridge funds for rural areas just ripped away from rural Illinois.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of battles where I'm just on the front line. You know, I'm an Army engineer, so I understand some of the technical sides of it. I was a mayor for 8 years, so I understand the local impact on roads and bridges. And now as a state senator, I'm in a position to advocate for rural regions. And there's sometimes we win those battles, and there's sometimes, because the maps are gerrymandered to weaken rural regions, there's a lot of times we lose. And that to me is the biggest battles going down in Springfield. And that's also where I have a lot of knowledge and ability to make an impact. So it's frustrating because of these unethical maps that we're on defense as much as we are. But we need strong voices out of rural areas. We need really strong voices to counteract those distorted maps.
Now, economics aside, you have been part of some social issues you've raised your voices about. Mm-hmm. How does that correspond with where'd the money go, I guess, as it were? I mean, because it's the truth. Sometimes, the society impacts that people in state politics love to trumpet about. Is that relevant to getting that bridge fixed? Is that relevant to making sure kids get an education?
It is. You see that flare up quite a bit. Some of the unfunded mandates on schools that come from some of these social drives, that triggers property taxes. The biggest one, though, was this kind of self-inflicted migrant crisis in Chicago, where we just stopped paying attention to whether somebody was a legal or an illegal migrant and just started throwing money everywhere. It really flared to the surface when we had a college student get murdered in Chicago, and these situations flare up every once in a while, and you come to find out the person who murdered her, young Miss Gorman, shouldn't have been in the country at all, had previously, been tracked down for shoplifting. We were using taxpayer money to pay for him to live there where he ended up murdering her. And you look at that and you realize we've spent billions on this migrant crisis that was mostly self-inflicted. And then you look at all the things we need funds for, DCFS, where we have children dying under state care, state wards, things like that. And you're like, what are our priorities here that these social issues are costing us billions of dollars and somewhat ironically preventing us from having the money to solve other social issues? So, it gets very complex, some of those challenges, but it really comes down to how are you spending our money and is it going where it needs to go? What are the priorities? And both rural areas tend to lose out in that discussion. And I would argue even Chicago's losing out. They are in need of a lot of reforms that would make their city more powerful. Chicago should be one of the great cities of the world. And instead, it's known for its economic struggles and its crime. And it doesn't need to be that way.
Illinois has had some wins in the last 6 months or so. It's been announced that the population actually ticked upward slightly. And also trillions and trillions, as Governor Pritzker had pointed out, in economic growth in certain sectors where things are turning around, whether because of policy or because of the economy in general around the world.
Right.
I think the population one is kind of interesting because a lot of people are like, nobody wants to live here, yet people are still living here.
Yeah, the population one is interesting because that is one of the, you can argue whether it's a benefit or not. People would say it's a benefit of the migrant situation where you had all these folks come into Chicago, and Illinois would have lost population without that. Excuse me. And because of the influx of people, some from Texas, very famously, and elsewhere, we actually finished net positive. We're still on track to lose another congressional seat at the next census, unfortunately. There are some wins. And it's kind of undercut the governor's concerns where he's been spending a lot of time attacking the federal government. But because of the national boost in economy there for a period, we have more revenue in Illinois than the governor was predicting, precisely because of that. Now, will that hold? I don't know. Who can predict the economic future? But it has made his budgets, whether he admits it or not, get help from some of those federal inflows.
And honestly, I think, as all residents would hope, that everybody would work together to make everything better, whether it involves cutting expenses or growing the economy. So now that we've talked about social issues, funding for roads and bridges, funding in general, let's throw money at the Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
See, and that's the thing. That's the dichotomy of this state, right?
It is.
It's like
it
so
is.
funny because we're like scraping together money. You're trying to save
nuts.
$25 for some poor soul to remain a notary. Yet you have hanging over the house in Springfield, you have this Arlington question and millions upon millions of dollars
for
guys.
Hundreds of millions,
For guys in special outfits.
And I'm a huge Bears fan, so this one hurts. Either outcome hurts me. Losing them to Indiana. Are the Bears going to get their first Super Bowl in my adult lifetime for the state of Indiana? Heck no, I can't stomach that. On the flip side, because our economy has done so poorly, we're risking incentivizing them at the cost of other taxpayers to a degree that almost undermines the benefits of keeping them. And there are huge benefits of keeping them. They are an economic anchor, one of many, of course, for that whole region of Illinois. And I am a true believer that Illinois is at its best when Chicago and the suburbs and the rural areas work together for the betterment of the state. And we do not have that under our current leadership and under current maps, but that is the version of Illinois that is an economic powerhouse. And in that version of Illinois, you wouldn't even need to incentivize the Bears as much as we are, because they wouldn't be facing this outrageous potential property tax bill at a new stadium. When we did the math, the highest property tax we could find in America was SoFi in California at around $9 million a year. In Arlington Heights, they were facing potentially between $100 million to $200 million in property taxes annually. And that is just a ton of beers and ticket sales. So they need relief from those property taxes, but so do local business, so do local restaurants, so does a local machine shop, so do manufacturers that are trying to hire. This is not unique to the Bears. This is all up and down our economy. And so we need to group together to solve Illinois' debt problems so we can have an economic resurgence and keep the Bears, but we got to keep the Bears in the next year. In the next months, actually.
And in my opinion, I think this whole Bears thing really roots back to, and this is going to be a throwback, to Mayor Daley campaigning for the Olympics. I really think it all started then when there was a proposal to redo all the sports facilities to get us ready for the Olympics in 10 years. And that sort of made the crashing the spaceship into Soldier Field and all the weird stuff happen. And I think because the Olympics didn't come through, I think we're at that crossroads we're at now.
We are. There was a lot of short-term decisions made, both financially and in terms of city planning, that have echoed for decades, really. And to your point, that money should have been going into preparing the future of Chicago for Chicago's sake and not necessarily for this, moonshot to the Olympics. And, whether you're talking about the parking meter revenue or all these horror stories that were very financially short-sighted, you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
And Chicago's guaranteed, the city of Chicago, guaranteed to lose the Bears. They're going to either Arlington Heights or Indiana. And that didn't need to be the case. I'm not from Chicago, but to me, I am a soldier. Losing the Bears out of Soldier Field hurts a little, no matter what. So a lot of struggles.
We had the potential for the McDome, too. Remember that plan?
Yeah.
Senator Li Arellano, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Happy Mother's Day.
All right. Happy Mother's Day.
All the mothers out there. Thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this week's In the Know. The program returns next week at this time with another great conversation with someone from your community.